We're learning a maamar of the Rebbe on this week's parsha. It's on the same pasuk that we learned the Kutei Torah on this week, which is the idea of the valleys and the mountains, with kind of the same idea, but it's the Rebbe's maamar on this topic. I'm kind of putting it together a little differently than the Alter Rebbe did, or we understand it a little differently. Again, the pasuk says about Eretz Yisrael. That's a land, Eretz Harim uvakais, a land of mountains and valleys. Limitar hashamayim, towards this rain from heaven. Tishtamayim, it drinks water. Meaning to say, the literal translation is that unlike Egypt, it rains, and the source of water is from the rain versus the Nile River. Eretz, the pasuk continues. God is always watching over Eretz Yisrael. This week's parsha. God's eyes are watching the land. From the beginning of the year, to the end of the year. Talking about the greatness of Eretz Yisrael. Again, of course, Parsha Zekev is a wonderful parsha about Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe says, like, one has to understand. What's the difference? What's the comparison? To describe Eretz Yisrael as a land of mountain and valleys, the Indian to the idea, that because it's mountains and valleys, so therefore, it's the rain that irrigates that waters the land as opposed to the Nile. It could be a flat land also and have a lot of rain, in theory. Also, we have to understand, or even if the mountain and valleys creates the ecosystem, the weather stream of the rain sometimes because the mountains does. Nevertheless, it should say that it's a land of rain. Why does it have to put it together with the fact that there's mountains and valleys? Also one has to understand, like the Alter Rebbe asks, it should say mimtar shemaim tishta, that it drinks, it urinates from the water, not limtar. The word limtar, the Hebrew grammar is towards the rain, not from the rain. It should say from the rain. Also we have to understand, at first it says it's a land of mountain and valleys, and afterwards it says that it's the water from the rain that waters the Eretz Yisrael. Then the pasuk continues, Eretz Asher, that this is the land that's Tomed God's eyes are always on Eretz Yisrael from the beginning to the end of the year. So first the Torah should talk about the main quality of Eretz Yisrael, which is that Eretz Yisrael is a land that God's watching constantly. God's always watching the land. And not the idea that God's watching it as if, so how much rain it needs. It's in general, God's watching Eretz Yisrael. Security, many things we all know there's to watch for Eretz Yisrael. Also, we can try to understand. The pasuk of Nezeh said, what does the verse say before that? The verse says before that, So means saying the first question is that the fact that God is watching should have been the first pasuk, not to say that Eretz Yisrael is a land of mountain and valleys, and it urinates from the rain. It's the rain that gives it water, but not the Nile. And then seemingly the continuation of the pasuk is God is watching it constantly to know how much rain it needs, because the rain comes from heaven. That's why we look up to heaven towards the rain, because it's more obvious that our needs are met from heaven. But the pasuk of Einei V'Alekecha, that God is watching the land from the beginning to the end of the year, that's not only about rain, it's about everything in Eretz Yisrael. That should have been the opening pasuk. And as a detail, also that this is a country that part of God's hashkacha prat is God's watchfulness, is to make sure it has enough rain. Before this whole thing, we have another verse. It says, Ki Eretz Hasha'ata Ba Shama L'Rishta, the land that you're coming to inherit, which means, i.e., Eretz Yisrael, like Eretz Mitzrayim. It's unlike the land of Egypt. Asher Yitzasa Misham, that you've left it. L'chura Hari God L'Shivcha, Shel Eretz Yisrael Mitzad Atzma, Ma Negeh L'Hadgish Hashli D'Eretz Mitzrayim. Why does it have to say that Eretz Yisrael is not like Egypt? It's a land that has water from the rain and it has God watching it. It's not what's special about Eretz Yisrael that it's not like Egypt. It's special on its own. Not understanding if Egypt was a good place or a bad place, to say that it's not like Egypt as if to say that's its uniqueness, that Egypt was Egypt. This is better than Egypt. No, Eretz Yisrael is great without being compared to Egypt. Achin, who the idea is like this. Yuvan api Maamar HaZohar, Parshas Bereishis. There's a Zohar in Bereishis that says as follows. It appears Mashakos Parshas Shmos that there's a verse in Shmos that says about Moshe. When Moshe comes, everyone knows where Moshe goes away from power. He goes to Midian. He goes to the well. He knows that all the fathers went to the well to meet their shidduchim. Right? It's coming up to above the day of shidduchim. So you go, if you want to know where to find your shidduch, go to the well. So he goes to the well and he saves the girls of Yisrael, the daughters of Yisrael. So it says, what did they say to their father? Menachem, Moshe, their father, their grandfather, different opinions. The Menachem, Moshe, Shuish Mitzrayim. You described him as an Egyptian. Even though the reason they called him an Egyptian is because he seemed to them to be an Egyptian. He looked like an Egyptian. He dressed like an Egyptian. He was Moshe from the house of Paro. So they didn't know better. So they described him as an Ish Mitzri, as an Egyptian. An Egyptian savior. The Gam Dalo Lanu, he also poured for us. He was drawing water for us. Yisrael understood from that he was a descendant of Yaakov. He saw that he was drawing water. He saw the habits. He wasn't behaving like an Egyptian. He was behaving like a descendant of Yaakov, which is a lesson on its own. But because Torah says this, and Torah says that he was called an Ish Mitzri, it means that Torah acknowledges the fact that he's called an Ish Mitzri. Torah doesn't record every conversation that happens, and not word for word. So if the Torah describes that Tzipporah says Ish Mitzri, or the daughters say Ish Mitzri, it means the Torah is acknowledging that's a true statement. The Torah acknowledges the statement, not because they thought he was an Egyptian. And it's not only a description of Moshe, it's a praise of Moshe. Ish Mitzri, he's an Egyptian. What's that mean? So the Zohar tackles that question. And the Zohar says as follows. This is the words of the Zohar. Taman is Yaled, there in Egypt he was born. Taman is Rabbe, there he was nursed. With Taman is Stalik Linahirilan, there he elevated from the Stalkos, he elevated to the great light. That they called him Ish Mitzri, he was an Egyptian. In Egypt he was born, in Egypt he was nursed, in Egypt he ascended to the great light. Muvar Bezet explains. Who explains? The Rebbe says my father. The Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Harav Levi Yitzchak, his yahrzeit is coming up Chaf Av, Bal HaYilula for the yahrzeit. So this week it's going to be if Wednesday is 15th, Thursday 16th, Friday 17th, 18th. This is meet on 18th of Menachem. But that year Chaf Av was on Shabbos Ekev. So the Rebbe is bringing down a teaching of his father. Shagimel L'Shonis is Yalid, is Rabbi, is Stalik. These three things that says Moshe was born there, he was nursed there, and he ascended to the great light over there. The Neged Hagimel Bechinas Moichin, the Ibor, the Unika, the Gadlus. It's coming to show you that these are the three levels of intellect. How intellect develops in what's called Ibor, what's called the stage of pregnancy of an idea. Then there's what's called Yinika, the nursing, suckling of the intellect. And then there's the Moichin the Gadlus, the high level of intellect. That the three levels that says that he was born, he nursed, and he elevated to the light is referring to the three levels of his intellectual growth. Moshe was Chachma, that he had the Chachma of the Ibor, the Chachma of the Yinika, the Chachma of the Gadlus. Shekulim hoy b'Moshe, they all were with the Moshe. When Moshe was born, he right away had the level of the complete intellect, of the level of the intellect of pregnancy, which is the idea of intellect of pregnancy is like in the pregnancy where the person's the fetus is totally complete in the mother's womb. The head is equal to the body rolled up. It's the early stages of intellectual development that's really more guided equally to the emotions. You're not yet standing in a form where the head is above the heart. So it's called the moichin of ibur, of pregnancy. And you have so he says that level was complete. That's where he was born. Then he was added. He also had the level of pregnancy. of nursing, which is a higher level, which means you're already standing form, and you're nursing, taking in more and more, like a baby grows through its mother's milk, and the amount that the baby grows both intellectually and mainly the form of the body that grows, and this importance of breastfeeding is the intellectual experience that Moshe also had in Egypt. It's called the Moichin of unique of nursing. Then he elevated to the Nahiri law, to the higher light. So Moichin the godless, which is the great level of Moichin, and all that he had in Ish Mitzrayim, all that he had in Mitzrayim. Moisiv Levar, the Alter and the Rebbe's father explains, there, because each one is a stage on its own. That there he was born, he nursed, and he elevated. Why does he have to say there he was born, there he nursed, there he elevated? Why does he have to say there 3 times? You do what you call Tavish Bizarre who Bitachsadik and the Zohar doesn't just throw words around, it's very exact. So why would it add? It would be understood if he said that Moshe was born, he was nursed, and he elevated in Egypt. Why does he have to say he grew in Egypt? Well, which is the indication to the nursing, which is his Rabbi, right? So you could have said there, we know it's talking about Egypt. That they showed how the words were exactly. These are all the grandfathers of the Rebbe's father. The Rebbe's father was the direct descendant of Tzemach Tzedek. Because each level is a level, it's on its own. Therefore, it said, there he was born, there he grew Rabbi, and there he was established. The 3 levels of intellect. The intellect of the pregnancy, so to say, which we said, which is more where the mind is equal to the heart. And the mind, the person starts to develop form and shape and how they're standing, which is the unika. And then there's Mochel Legadus, so you're on your own. The great intellect. They're not, you can't just put them into one there. There has to be there on each one, because there's such each level of growth intellectually from Moshe was such a tremendous jump that it had to have its own tamon, its own there. How could you compare a baby, a fetus that's in its mother's womb, which is the head is together with the knees, right? It's all rolled up, which is all of the 3 minds are together with the 3 emotions. The Chacham, Bina, Das, and the Chesed, Vur, Tiferes are all one. Your intellect and your emotions are it's hard to differentiate between the 2. To when a person's already holding the level of unique of nursing. So and then the child's already born in the stage of unique of nursing. It's a huge difference. We know that Golus, exile, is like the process of going through exile is like an experience of Ibur, of pregnancy. That's what we say. Yitzis Mitzrayim by Shvisha Pesach, when we finally got totally out of Egypt, splitting the Red Sea is like a birth. And the prophets, when they talk about the redemptions, that's already after the birth. Yechezkel says, the whole idea of Golus is when the child is in pregnancy. And when he gets born, that's like the redemption. So that's why, of course, you have to have a separation of Tamon. Here he was the level of a fetus, of an Ibor, because that's one whole stage. That's a whole different place. It's a place of Golus, for example. And then you have the place where the child starts to grow with his like pregnancy, which is like a nursing. He's already born. That's like a Geula. So you can't compare Geula and Golus in one sentence, one statement. If we have to have Tamon. We've had many times in Torah when the Torah divides, something like that. Here he was born, here he nursed, here he had Menachem and Gadlus, is because each stage is very separate. Well, the Mali is much greater even than the level of unique of nursing is Menachem and Gadlus, the broadness of the mind. Which is totally different and at another whole level than the level of unique of nursing, which is a much stronger level of dependency. A child nurses, gets everything from its mother. The great elevation, the word silik also comes the word leaving. I have to leave here to go there, right? Moshe said when he saw the burning bush, right? He has to leave where he is to go to there. You have to leave your past to go to your present. You have to leave even the level of Yanika to go to the level of the godless. That's where it's Stalik. You have to totally disconnect from where he was before to reach the Gamma Midrash of Neza. So now we know why he said here he was born. Here he was, so to say, he grew with like the level of nursing. Here he had Mechan the godless. Yanki called Bechinas Magim, Bechinas Anal, who Bechinas Fniatz, each level is level on its own. Avodah is level question. Tzarech Lavan, Mayad Goshish Koze Hoyib Tamam b'Mitzrayim Dafka. Why do we have to say that Moshe became who he is in Egypt? Which is going to answer the question why we called him Ish Mitzri. Why does the Zohar have to say that there in Egypt he was born? When you want to say that he at the level of the galus, which is connected to the concept of Mitzrayim, which is like the brain, which is in a status of pregnancy, where the brain is kind of equal to the emotions. Mitzrayim, therefore you could say it's Mitzrayim, but Moichem, which is Unica, the brain that's already nursing, which is already Geula, which is born. Why is that Mitzrayim? That's already out of Mitzrayim. Notwithstanding if technically he had it then, but why would you want to point out to emphasize that he had it there? Surely his great place, his great elevation of the great broadness of the mind, even if he had it in Egypt, why do we have to emphasize that? What's it connected to Egypt? Why is it connected to Mitzrayim? We have to emphasize that he had both the level of the Yanika and both the level of Istalik of getting to the great Moshiach the godless. He had it in Egypt. It's not so much a question why did it have to happen there, but why does the Torah have to tell us that? The Zohar. You knew that he is because even when one leaves Egypt and you have redemption, even when you get to, this what the Rebbe is going to get to is the idea of matis and mas. It's a brilliant concept. The Rebbe how he's explaining this idea. Like we say, the Rebbe said, the Alter Rebbe asked the questions, why does it say in the Masif Bnei Yisrael? These are the travels of the Jewish people from Egypt. You only traveled once from Egypt. The next time you traveled from wherever you were after you were in Egypt. You feed them, each place. You weren't in Egypt, but every time you traveled, the 42 travels is leaving Egypt. Why? So the Alter Rebbe answers, because it's all Egypt until you get there. And here the Rebbe says the same idea. It's not that it's all Egypt. You still have the memory to truly appreciate Geula as a remembering that there was a goddess. Your Geula is kind of a Geula because you remember Mitzrayim. So therefore it says, yes, he had Yanika, which is already Leda, which is at Geula, and he had Moichem the godless, but it's Taman, it's there, it's Egypt. Recognizing Egypt and staying connected to kind of what you were, where you were, helps you grow. And from the darkness comes light. You have to remember the Mitzrayim. You left Egypt. Now you could appreciate, like a person really appreciates when a person is very poor and becomes rich. So it's important to remember where you come from, your humble beginnings, to help you appreciate and be the proper rich person that you could be, when a person that you don't take advantage of it. And it's an opportunity versus something that you think you deserve. Where does the light come from when it's from the darkness? Therefore, we point out Taman. There in Egypt, he was born. There in Egypt, he was nursing. There in Egypt, he had Menachem begadlus. Even though it's the concept itself is beyond Egypt, but it's being that he was in Egypt. It's how the person, how Moshe really appreciates the growth that he had. Therefore, the pasuk tells us that now that you're coming to Eretz Canaan, which is Eretz Yisrael, it's time to stop forgetting Egypt. Pasuk says before you go into Eretz Yisrael, that's all good in the desert. Maaseh Bnei Yisrael, you're constantly going. Now you come to Eretz Canaan, you have to stop. You come to Eretz, you have to stop. You have to forget about Egypt. Egypt becomes a stale concept to what Eretz Yisrael is. It's an amazing idea. Now you go into Eretz Yisrael, it's not like Egypt. No more Taman, there you were born, and there you were nursed, and there you had Mechem the godless. You left it. It's time to leave. Before we want to start talking about what Eretz Yisrael is, You have to say you're leaving the whole concept of Egypt, including the benefits of Egypt. What's this meaning in our avodah? You have to know that where you are is a Meitzah. Now it's time to leave that space. It's time to go to Eretz Yisrael. Knowing that right now this is a limitation, I need to go to a place that's not limited anymore. And in the bigger picture there has to be a disconnect from that Meitzah and going to a total level of broadness that's not even connected anymore, that level of Meitzah. So just do one more sieve. When we talk about Eretz Yisrael on its own, it's not Egypt. Eretz Harim, it's the mountain of valleys and the mountains. Whenever we talk about Eretz Yisrael, it's not just a description of Eretz Yisrael here, where we are right now in the land of Eretz Yisrael Lamata. It also corresponds to the concept of Eretz Yisrael Shalamayim. Like it says, Eretz Harim, the land of the living. They call it Eretz Yisrael Lamatish, and Chavenes Keneged Eretz Yisrael Shalamayim. Why is it called the lands Artsois plural? Because there's a Yisrael Shalamata, which is Mechuvenes, right? To Eretz Yisrael Shalamayim, Eretz Yisrael above. Shehi Bechinas Knesset Yisrael, which corresponds also to the Jewish people. Shemashpas Lachon Shamas Yisrael, that gives life to the Jewish people. Shagam Heim Nikrem Shem Eretz. The Jewish people called the Eretz, and the Eretz, that the way we are down here is connected, corresponding to Knesset Yisrael. Tiyu Eretz Chefetz, the Jewish people are a land of desire. Maamar Text, why is it called Eretz Yisrael? What's the word Eretz? Land also means from the word Ratzah. Shratza Lasis Ritzon Koine is a place where people want to do what Hashem wants. That's also the nature of a Yid, like the Rambam writes. The Ratzin of a Yid is do what Hashem wants. If you don't do it, it's the Yitzrayim Shita. Even Shani Lein Yavrasi, I'm just going to. My whole purpose is to serve my master. This is not a description only about Eretz Yisrael. It's a land of mountain and valleys within every person. Now we'll continue next class. Hopefully on Friday we'll finish the Maamar, which is going to, or Thursday, sorry, tomorrow's Wednesday, Thursday. We'll finish the Maamar of Thursday, Friday, which now goes into the idea of the Rebbe, which is the idea of Av and Yiv. Okay, see you next class.